بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So we're continuing today with our studies of the book Bulugh Al-Maram, book of collection of hadith on the fiqh of ibadat, the fiqh of worship and the fiqh of mu'amalat, the fiqh of transactions and other than this. And we started a few lessons ago with the Kitab al-Tahara, purification, the chapter of water, and we're on hadith number 6 now. And inshallah we'd like someone to read the Arabic. We're going to read two hadith, number 6 and the one after it. We'd like someone to read the Arabic and the English, inshallah. You'd like to read?
No, we're on hadith number 5 now.
I don't know if we did 5.
Sorry, 5, yes. I was looking at the wrong one. We're going to do 5 and 6 today. Who wants to read?
I can read, but I don't have glasses. Can you
تفضل.
وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله
صلى الله عليه
وسلم
وسلم.
لا يغتسل أحدكم في الماء الدائم وهو جنوب أخرج المسلم وللبخاري لا يبولن أحدكم في الماء الدائم دائم الذي لا يجري ثم يغتسل فيه والمسلم منه ولا أبي داود ولا يغتسل فيه من الجنابة.
Okay, that's enough. So the two ahadith are put together in this one. So, jazakallah khair. So, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يغتسل. Yeah, you didn't read the English. Sorry, I forgot. Go ahead.
So narrated Abu Huraira radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi wa sallam said, none of you should take a bath in stagnant water while he is sexually impure. Muslim reported it. Al-Bukhari has, none of you should urinate in stagnant water that is not flowing, then take a bath in it. Muslim has the words from it, that is from the water. Abu Dawood has, one should not take bath in it from sexually impurity.
طيب, we have many things in these 2 or 3 ahadith. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, لا يغتسل أحدكم في الماء الدائم وهو جنوب. One of you should not bathe in stagnant water, meaning water that is not moving, still water, while he is junub, while he is in a state of sexual impurity after relations with the spouse. So this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is forbidding bathing in water, in still water, while you are in a state of janaba. Okay? And the prohibition is due to a person polluting the water that some others may be able to use. And that's for still water that is not running. These hadith are for water that is stagnant, water that is not running. So the Prophet ﷺ forbids a person from يغتسل في الماء الدائم. bathing in the stagnant water, meaning putting your entire body in the water. And this hadith mentions وَهُوَ جُنُب, while he is in a state of sexual impurity. So the person in that state could pollute the water and make it unusable for others. Remember, this is stagnant water, water that is not running. But the scholars say the Prophet ﷺ mentioned sexual impurity because a person who is junub is in need of a bath. He needs a bath more than anyone else because he has to pray. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned وَهُوَ junub because that person is more in need of a bath than someone else. So the scholars say this applies to a person even wanting to bathe in there just for cleaning himself while he is not junub, or just for cooling off, like a pool or something. So bathing in that water, the Prophet ﷺ has forbidden the bathing in stagnant water, water that is not running. Because you can pollute it, dirty it for others. Okay, even if it's a small amount, it's going to get dirty quick. And Allah knows how. Allahu A'lam how, by you going in the water, Allah knows how it's going to be polluted or dirtied. And it says here, or it doesn't say in the hadith, the amount of water that this applies to, whether it's a small amount or a large amount. So the scholars say that, or some of those ulama, they say that if it's a large amount of water, it's fine, because a very large amount of water is going to cleanse itself. And one person is not going to pollute a very large amount of water, even if it's still like a lake, a big lake. It's not running, but it still moves in itself. So the scholars say if it's a large amount of water, it's fine. But the correct opinion is that if it is stagnant water, if it's not running, then the hadith is clear that the Prophet ﷺ forbade bathing in that water. So that's the narration, the first narration of Muslim. Okay, do not bathe in stagnant water while a person is junub. Okay, and then he mentions the narration of Imam al-Bukhari. So they're similar, but a little different. So the Imam, rahimahullah, Imam Ibn Hajar, he puts them together here, these two ahadith. The second one is by Bukhari, لا يبولن أحدكم في الماء الدائم ثم يغتسل فيه. So the second prohibition is do not urinate in stagnant water. First one from Muslim is do not bathe, do not take a shower, do not bathe in stagnant water. Bukhari, do not urinate in stagnant water, and then bathe in that same water that that person just urinated in. Obviously, the reason, you are polluting the water yourself. And even if you were not to bathe in it, the Prophet ﷺ forbade it because other people may have a need for that water. So the prohibition here is to not urinate in the stagnant water and then bathe in that water. And all of this comes under the principle of not harming others. Okay? Not harming yourself and not harming others, not being a cause for others to get harmed. And that is physical harm or being dirtied or diseases maybe from the body or sicknesses or whatever it may be. You do not want to be the cause of that. So the prohibition of not bathing in the water, whether you are junub or not, the prohibition of not urinating in stagnant water so as not to or pollute the water for others. So the different narrations here, he mentions a few other parts of other narrations where he says Muslim has the words from it, Abu Dawood has one should not take a bath in it from sexual impurity. So one narration is do not take a bath in it. The other narration, do not take a bath from it. Fihi is in it, meaning do not put your body into the water. From it is do not take the water out with your hands. Do not scoop the water out. The one with scooping is from the prohibition of not urinating in the water. Obviously because it's become polluted with the najasa, with the impurity of urine. So these ahadith, these several ahadith here, they, as we said, it teaches the Muslim how to be clean in yourself and how not to harm others, not to cause harm to others. And this is a very big principle in Islam, a very big issue in Islam, self-cleanliness and not causing harm to other Muslimin or anyone else. For example, if the water is there and people use the water and you go and bathe in it, Allahu A'lam how it can become impure for others. They might use it for cleaning their utensils, they might use it for cleaning their homes, their clothes, whatever it may be. You don't want to be a cause for that water to become impure. So these ahadith, the wordings of these ahadith are what we have said, or what it clearly states here of the prohibitions of bathing or urinating in stagnant water, and not using that, or not bathing in that water. And for a person who is junub, that person should take extra care not to bathe in the stagnant water, because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned specifically while a person is in janaba. So I want to show you, inshallah, a few things about how scholars, they take rulings from ahadith and from ayat. In Islam, when there's an ayah or a hadith, there's the clear text of the ayah or the hadith. Okay, we have here لا يغتسل أحدكم في الماء الدائم. Okay, so there's a prohibition, and then there's certain restrictions or certain parts of that prohibition that apply to that specific prohibition. So the Prophet ﷺ said, do not bathe in, you have stagnant water, al-ma' al-da'im. Al-da'im, which means stagnant. It also says, وَهُوَ جُنُوب. That is impure from relations with the spouse. So there's something in the science of extracting rulings from ayat and ahadith that is called mantuq al-hadith. And that is the actual wording of the hadith, what it says, what the actual words say and what they imply. So the Prophet ﷺ said, do not bathe in stagnant water. This is mantuq al-hadith. Okay? So one way is mantuq, and that is the actual wording or the text. The actual text of what the actual word is. So the mantuq, the wording of this hadith is, do not bathe in stagnant water while you are junub. Okay? Clear cut, what the words say is what the ruling is. Okay? But there's also something we can take from this hadith that is not written. It's not the actual text, and that is mafhum. And that is the understanding behind it. Okay, the mafhum of this hadith, the text is, do not bathe in stagnant water. The understanding is, I can bathe in running water. Okay, but it doesn't say that, but that's what's understood. That's the mafhum of the hadith. That's what the scholars take from the understanding behind these words. Okay, the mantuq is, do not bathe in stagnant water, but I understand from that I can bathe in running water. The mantuq is, وَهُوَ junub, while he is sexually impure. The understanding is, I can bathe in stagnant water if I am pure, if I am not sexually impure. So these are some of the understandings we can take from a hadith or an ayah, but the person has to have knowledge of the entire issue, of the entire topic, and knowledge of Islam in general, before he can go into extracting rulings from the understanding of the ahadith. Because the scholars say that even though the mafhum is, the understanding is that I can bathe in stagnant water if I am not junub, the scholars say you still should not do that, because there may be something else on your body that will pollute the water even if you are not junub. And a person who is junub, he's not najis or anything. He's not, there's no physical impurities on him. He's in a state where he has to take a bath before he can pray or make hajj or umrah or anything like that. So, from this hadith, we get those mantuq, the text gives us rulings, and the mafhum, the understandings, also give us rulings. But we cannot just go into any hadith as people who are not scholars. We can't just go into these hadith and start bringing out rulings from what we understand. The person has to be a person of knowledge and has to have encompass the topic at hand, know all the adillah, know all the evidences, ahadith and ayat that are in regards to this topic, before you can start extracting rulings from the understanding of what the hadith said. An example of this from the Quran is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about respecting parents and how to treat your parents. وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ. And do not even say, as a sign of displeasure or disrespect to your parents, do not even say uff, which is the slightest form of displeasure you can show. If some of your parents tell you to do something or want you to, do something, and we've all done it, we're like, oh, something like that, But the Quran uses the word uff because that's something the Arab used to say as a sign of displeasure. Uff. So the text says, do not even say uff to your parents. The meaning, the mafhum is, I can't say anything more than that. Okay, because someone can say, the Quran says don't say uff. I can say other things. I can curse at them. I can say, much worse, because the Quran doesn't say that. So the understanding from that ruling is, that's the least amount of displeasure or I can show them, and anything above that is even worse. Any type of displeasure above that is even worse. So these ahadith, we have plenty of rulings taken from the words, the mantuq, the actual text, and the scholars also extracted some rulings based on the mafhum, the understanding of those ayat, this hadith. And as I said, a person has to know the topic really well before you can extract these rulings, even from the text, because you have to combine all the text together before you can make some rulings. So this hadith, the first one, talks about junub, janaba, and there are several ways a person can become junub. Okay, as we said, janaba means sexual impurity, meaning after a man or woman has had relations with their spouse, they are in a state of impurity where now they have to take a bath, a ghusl, before they can pray. Okay? So there are several ways a person, and this applies to men and women. Janaba is for men and women. So there are several ways a person can become junub. The first one is by intercourse with the spouse. That involves ejaculation. Okay? Ejaculation can happen by intercourse with the spouse. That's number one. It can happen by a wet dream. And it can happen by masturbation. Okay, all of these, the person has ejaculated. It is now wajib upon that person to bathe before they can pray. This is called the major impurity. The minor impurity is, relieving yourself, using the bathroom. This is the minor impurity that needs wudu. The major impurity is what we said, that needs a bath. Ghusl, ightisal. You need to wet your entire body before you can make salah. Okay, so there's major impurity and minor impurity. So the junub is by ejaculation, as what we said, by the intercourse, having a wet dream, and this happens to men and women, is when you ejaculate while you are sleeping. That needs a bath, or by masturbation, which is prohibited in Islam. That also requires a bath before the person can pray. The other way a person can become junub is by intercourse, even without ejaculation. So just by the male organ coming in contact with the female organ, just even for 1 second, the janaba has fallen on them both, and they both need to take a bath before they can pray. Okay, so those are the different ways a person becomes junub, and it's very important for us to know these things because it involves what? Salah. It involves prayer. This whole chapter is here, the first chapter of the book and the first chapter of many books of fiqh is purification because, as we said, because of salah. Because you need this for salah, and salah is the most important amal, the most important deed you do as a Muslim. Okay, we're going to read the next two hadith, inshallah. They're not going to take very long. Who would like to read them? Arabic and English. Mustafa.
وعن رجل صاحب النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم قال نهى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أن تغتسل مرأة بفضل الرجل أو الرجل بفضل المرأة وليغترفا جميعا أخرجه أبو داود والنسائي وإسناده صحيح. A man who accompanied the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam narrated, Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade a woman from bathing with the water left over by a man, and a man from bathing with the water left over by a woman. Instead, they should both scoop up handfuls of water together. Reported by Abu Dawood and An-Nisai, and it's chain for narrators in Sahih authentic.
And the next one, please.
وعن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم كان يغتسل بفضل ميمونة رضي الله تعالى عنها أخرجه المسلم ولأصحاب السنن اغتسل بعض أزواج النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم في
جفنة, yes.
فجاء النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم ليغتسل منها فقالت له إنني كنت جنبا فقال إن الماء لا يجنب والصحح والترمذي وابن خزيمة. Narrated Ibn Abbas radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used to bath with the water left over by Maimuna radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Muslim reported it. And Ashabul Sunan, here meaning Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi and Ibn Majah, reported that one of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam took a bath from a vessel. Then the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came, and when he wanted to take a bath from that vessel, she said to him, I was sexually impure. He said, water does not become sexually impure. At-Tirmidhi and Ibn Khuzaymah graded it sahih, authentic.
طيب. So these two ahadith, the first one, عن رجل صاحب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. You don't see this very often, that the companion is not named. It says a man who accompanied the Prophet ﷺ. We don't see this very often, but it does happen in a hadith. And because as long as that person is confirmed to be a companion, it does not affect the hadith at all. Why? Because all companions are reliable, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with all of them. Radiyallahu anhum wa radu an. Allah says in the Quran, Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Him. So the companion in a hadith, the companion that comes right before the Prophet ﷺ saying something, every single companion is reliable, and there's no need to look into who he is or how his memory is or if he's authentic or whatever is done to everyone else after that, to the Salaf and the rest of the chain. Every person has to be studied and analyzed, how his memory was he reliable, Did he meet the person he's narrating from? Did he die before him, or did he actually meet him? Did he live in a different region? The rest of the chain of narration has to be analyzed and studied except for the companion, because Allah says Allah is pleased with them all and they are all reliable and authentic. So here he's not named, but the scholars say this chain is good and that the person who narrated from him confirmed that he indeed was a companion, and the person who narrated from him said that he accompanied the Prophet ﷺ for several years, just like Abu Huraira accompanied him. So the first hadith, the Prophet ﷺ forbade a man to bathe from the remaining water that a woman bathed in, and for a woman to bathe in the remaining water that a man bathed in. The second hadith says the Prophet ﷺ bathed in the remaining water of Maymuna. So what's the problem here?
Contradicting.
It's a contradiction? You sure?
Looks like it.
Because one is junub, one is without the junub.
One's junub, one's without junub. Okay. Anytime you think first of all, there's no contradictions in Islam. Even though it clearly looks like a contradiction to us, in Islam, because everything is from Allah, there's no contradiction. The problem is with us, if we don't see the entire picture or we don't understand the entire issue, it's how we view it that might seem like a contradiction to us, so we have to figure out what to do with these ahadith. But the fundamental principle is there is no contradiction in Islam whatsoever. As long as the hadith is sahih, doesn't matter what it says, and another hadith is sahih, there is a way to reconcile between the ahadith or the ayat, as long as the ahadith are sahih. So the first one, the Prophet is forbidding us to do something, and the second one, he does it. Okay? That he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he bathed, the Prophet used to bathe with the water left over by Maymuna, radiyallahu anha. Maymuna was one of his wives, and she was the last woman the Prophet ﷺ married. She was the last wife he married in his lifetime, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she was a very righteous woman. Even so that Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that Maymuna was from amongst us. She feared Allah the most from amongst his wives, and she had the best family ties with her family. She kept the best relationship with her family. So Aisha radiallahu anha, she's praising Maymuna. So you have a prohibition, and then you have the Prophet ﷺ doing that what he prohibited. So the scholars say the prohibition is there, and then when the Prophet ﷺ does it, it means that prohibition is not for haram. It's not something that is forbidden. It becomes less than haram, makruh, or permissible. Okay? So when the Prophet ﷺ forbids something, and this happens a lot in ahadith and ayat, not every time Allah forbids something, that thing is haram. Or the Prophet ﷺ forbids something, that thing is haram. Not every time. Sometimes if it's done by him or done by someone else and he approves of it, it comes out of the category of haram, forbidden, into the category of disliked or the category of permissible. And not every time the Sharia says a command, that command is obligatory. Okay? Sometimes there's a command, but it's not for obligation. It can be for something that is recommended as a sunnah act. So the scholars reconcile between these two ahadith that the Prophet ﷺ forbade it, but it is not haram to do it because he himself did that action. Also, they say that the hadith of the action where he bathed in the leftover water of Maymuna, this hadith is stronger than the hadith, and there's more narrations in this regard. And they mention a few here, and there's many more narrations in this regard. And the Prophet ﷺ, he bathed in the water left over by Maymuna radiallahu anha. And they say it's a possibility that they both bathed from one container of water, scooping the water out, not going into the water. They say that's another possibility of what happened. But even if it didn't, even if he did perform this, or he did do it, even if they were in the tub or whatever, that it removes the prohibition from something being haram. And the other narrations here that the wives of the Prophet ﷺ took a bath from a vessel, then the Prophet ﷺ came when he wanted to take a bath from that vessel. His wife said to him, I was junub, meaning I used that water while I was junub. And the Prophet ﷺ said, water does not become junub. So a person is junub and he goes in the bath. The water doesn't mean that water is going to be junub or that water is going to be impure. Okay, the prohibition is, as we said in the beginning, to not pollute the water for someone else. So the fact that the Prophet ﷺ did it means it's permissible, it's okay to do this act as he did. And these things do not point to the fact that the water becomes najis. Okay? Being junub and going in the water does not point to the fact, there's no evidence that the water has become junub, because the Prophet ﷺ did not address the water. He addressed the person going in it. And the first two ahadith we read, he addressed not bathing in the water, and he addressed the type of water, which was stagnant water. He did not address the purity of the water, meaning there's no evidence to say that if a junub person goes into the bath or the water that is stagnant, that water becomes junub. It just means that you don't want to dirty it by any other means for someone else. But the fact that he did use the leftover water of Maymuna shows it's something that is permissible to do in Islam. And these two ahadith the rulings that we took from them are very common in how the scholars reconcile between two ahadith in this way, that if there's a prohibition and then the act is done, usually the scholars of Islam, they take from this that, okay, that prohibition now is not forbidden in Islam, and that's exactly what we have here. And this is, you might think it's poor organization by the author, that he puts a hadith that prohibits something, and then he brings a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ is doing that prohibition. But it actually shows the fiqh of this Imam Ibn Hajar, that he wants to give you both sides of the story, so that you know, so that if we just had the first hadith that the Prophet ﷺ forbade a man to use the leftover water of a woman and the woman to use the leftover water of a man, if that's all we know, then someone comes with this other hadith and says, but the Prophet ﷺ bathed with the leftover water of Maymuna, then that leaves you in, a situation where you haven't studied the issue well. So he brings both sides, so you know both sides of this topic, and that your knowledge of the topic is more broad now than someone who just knows one or the other of these hadith. Inshallah, we're going to stop there. Any questions about these topics, inshallah?
So when you said it was prohibited and then Prophet ﷺ did it, so it took it out of the category of the prohibition. But it could be possible that Prophet ﷺ, when he prayed with the shoes on, and then because of the revelation, he knew, so he took the shoes off. And when Sahaba did, he said he should not have done it. In the same fashion, when this hadith was mentioned, Prophet ﷺ, because the water in itself is not najas, it's pure in its way. So for us, we would, if there is anything najas in there, probably Prophet ﷺ would have been stopped by revelation to take the bath on it. For us, as a common folk, we don't get revelation. We don't know there could be a najas in it from one of the other person. So that could be problematic. So I think both hadith, and it's Allah Alam, I'm not the scholar, but in what my understanding is, both hadith has its own merits in its own way. Allah Alam. Maybe you can comment on that.
From what I understood, from what you're saying, is you're saying when the Prophet ﷺ bathed with leftover water of Maymuna, that Allah gave him revelation that it's not impure?
No. He would have got the revelation if the water would be
Allahu A'lam, the hadith doesn't mention that, but the hadith about when he had the dirt on his shoes and Allah revealed to him that he had najasa on his shoes, so he took his shoes off, that was a lesson to that you cannot pray with your shoes if they have a najasa on it, and you should remove it when you come to that knowledge, even if you're in salah, that you become knowledgeable of something impure on your clothes, you remove it. So that was a teaching point that the Prophet ﷺ gave us. But here there's no mention of revelation or anything, so we can't go into the possibility of maybe this or maybe that. We take what's in front of us, and that there's a prohibition, and then there's a practice of what was prohibited, so that is taken out of that category. No.
I'm going to ask, it's just more of a general question. When you're talking about hadith, is there like a way to know like the timeline, like what came first, as opposed to maybe that hadith came first and then it was forbidden, or is there a way to...
Yeah, there is a way. The scholars of hadith, not every hadith is clearly known, the timeline of it. Most of them are. In general, Mecca and Medina, and then even more specific than that, where and when these ahadith were said, but not all of them are known. But that is another way to reconcile between the ahadith. But even so, if there's no proof that the second one is abrogating the first one, then you still have to try to practice both. So the abrogation that can be used for trying to know if the earlier hadith or ayah was abrogated, meaning it's not practiced anymore. The second one is what is practiced. If there's proof of abrogation, then the timeline is very important. But if there's no proof of abrogation or mention of abrogation, then even if you know which one is early, which one is late, you still have to practice and reconcile between the hadith. Sisters, have any questions? Yes.
So I'm just making my own mafhum here.
Okay.
Pretty problematic. So
remember what we said after mafhum. Just be careful.
So my understanding is when Maimuna radiallahu ta'ala anha started bathing, started puring herself, at that time she was impure, and her hand must have touched the water, scooping out of the water, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it means that even her hand touched the water still remained pure. That's why Prophet ﷺ came later, and he took a bath from the same water.
Mm-hmm.
Following? So it means that, the understanding is, my understanding is, if the woman of the house or a man of a house, if they are sexually impure, if they work at a house, for example, washing dishes, it doesn't impure anything at all. We can still use that utensil for our use, even if it's touched by either a woman or man, and if they are sexually impure.
Yes. Yeah, so as we said, someone being junub, coming into contact with water or even using the water does not make the water impure. Secondly, there's no mention in here that Maymuna was scooping the water out. Okay, so that's a possibility. She scooped the water and bathed herself, or she went in the water and bathed herself. Neither one is mentioned, so they're both a possibility. Either way, she touched the water, she bathed herself, she finished, and when she was done, the Prophet ﷺ came. So, bifadl Maymuna, the fadl of a person is the leftover water they use after they have made wudu or taken a bath. Okay, whether they went in the tub and then finished and got out, or they scooped out the water and bathed themselves without going in. So that water, either way you do it, is the fadl, the leftover water. So however she did it, the Prophet ﷺ came after her and used it. How he did it is also a possibility. He scooped it or he went in it. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So either way, the water does not become impure, or the women in the home, if they are junub and they're touching water and cleaning the dishes or whatever, the home, that doesn't mean these other things are becoming junub. As the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ الْمَاء لَا يُجْنَبْ.